A black woman stood poised, awaiting her morning train. Nothing out of the ordinary until a white officer stormed into her space, bellowing as if she were an intruder, his hand lunging toward her like she was a danger. What came next? A single flawless punch, sharp, devastating, sent him sprawling across the platform. But this isn't just about that strike. It's about her essence, her struggles, and how one explosive moment tore through a deeper truth. You're about to dive into a raw clash of prejudice, silence, and retribution. By the end, you'll see why this story demanded to be heard. Hey, we're at 49 subs and growing. Help us hit 1,000 by subscribing. Join our community to amplify powerful stories like Sarah's and spark real change together.
It was just past 6:30 a.m. when Sarah Thompson stepped off the final bus, striding across the near-deserted lot outside Riverside Station. The pavement glistened, still slick from last night's rain, catching the golden dawn light that bled across the platform like molten honey, slow and unyielding. A weathered wooden bench crouched under the awning, its paint chipped, metal arms corroded by time. She settled onto it with the quiet precision of someone who'd long mastered taking up minimal space. In one hand, a battered leather briefcase, in the other, an untouched thermos. The air hung cold and still, raw with the honesty only early mornings carry. Behind her, the faint hum of traffic barely stirred, the town holding its breath. She sat ramrod straight, feet planted firmly, as the Marines had drilled into her. This wasn't a war zone, or so it seemed. She tilted her head, eyes tracing the tracks as they vanished into the fog, their steel glinting with dew. Silence wrapped around her, heavy as a woolen shroud, her steady breaths cutting through it. A voice sliced the calm, sharp and probing. Waiting for someone? An older white man in a tan windbreaker stood a few feet off, his wife clinging to his arm. Sarah glanced up, offering a curt, polite nod, her voice cool and even. "Just the train, sir." No defiance in her words, yet his eyes narrowed, as if her mere existence demanded justification. His wife murmured something he barely caught. He grumbled, Yeah, I know." And they shuffled away, steps slower than before. Sarah's gaze snapped back to the tracks, unfazed, unsurprised, simply accustomed. She fished her phone from her coat pocket. 6:37. The train was due at 6:52. 15 minutes to go. A mockingbird's sharp trill pierced the air, a fleeting counterpoint to the weight in her chest. Part of her considered calling her cousin to kill time, but a louder instinct warned against drawing eyes. Not here. Not now. Her face stayed calm, eyes steady, pensive. Beneath that cool exterior, her mind churned. The courthouse loomed. A young client waited, a judge with a short fuse, and those inevitable stares tracking her through the halls, not for who she was, but for who they assumed she wasn't. Nothing about her posture screamed threat, yet she knew how swiftly calm could be misread. She adjusted her coat collar, shifted her feet just enough to stake her claim silently. Across the platform, a security guard emerged from the station, his gaze lingering on her, heavy and deliberate, before he moved on without a word. Her breathing held steady, but she clocked everything. The distant clatter of a shopping cart, the buzz of the overhead light, the gusts tugging at her coat's hem. Sarah had known war zones quieter than this, not in sound, but in tension, the kind cameras never catch. It lived in the subtle, the glances that pierced or avoided, the questions asked just to test your response. She took a slow sip from her thermos, the lukewarm coffee a small comfort, and shut her eyes briefly, not to rest, but to steel herself. Her briefcase held a folder with today's case, every detail seared into her memory. She'd rehearsed her arguments, braced for the judge's interruptions, anticipated the prosecutor's smug grin. What she couldn't prepare for was the unpredictable chaos of public spaces that branded her a problem before she spoke. Each morning, she coached herself. Stay cool, stay sharp, stay unseen, until it's time to be heard. But that didn't always work. Sometimes the air grew heavy before a single word. The train's horn wailed in the distance, low and haunting. She straightened, resetting her stance. The moment was near. Another day, another courtroom, another unspoken battle waged with patience, intellect, and a strength no one applauded. Behind her, the old couple lingered by the vending machine, stealing glances they thought she didn't notice. She saw but ignored them. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy, a calculated choice. A test was coming today, as always. She just didn't know its source or its messenger. But deep down, she felt its approach. The wind turned colder, and she clutched her coat tighter, staring past the rails where steel met fog. She didn't flinch when a voice barked, louder now, thick with suspicion. Her hand froze on her briefcase handle. The train hadn't arrived, but something else was closing in. She heard him first, the heavy scrape of boots on concrete, the rigid cadence of a man driven not by duty, but by arrogance. Officer Mark Reynolds emerged from the platform's edge, a shadow emboldened by daylight, his mirrored sunglasses flashing in the low sun, his hand already fidgeting with the radio on his chest. He wasn't rushed, but his stride screamed intent, hunting for someone to disrupt. Sarah kept her eyes down, sipping her coffee, spine rigid, trained by years not to meet certain stares too soon. But when he veered off his patrol path, cutting straight toward her, she knew. He halted 3 feet away, invading her space just enough to make his point, his silence dangling like a trap. "Morning," he said, voice clipped, feigning neutrality but laced with distrust. Sarah looked up, delivering a calm, practiced nod. "Good morning, officer." Her tone was balanced, warm enough to dodge accusations of attitude, firm enough to ward off disrespect. He scanned her, eyes raking from her briefcase to her boots to her face, sizing her up against some mental sketch. She didn't blink, didn't waver. That scrutiny was old news. "What's your business here?" he demanded, shoulders squaring like he was bracing for a fight that wasn't his to start. Sarah's voice held steady. "Waiting for the 652 heading to court." He cocked his head. "You a lawyer?" She parted her coat to reveal the courthouse ID clipped to her blouse. "Public defender." A tense beat passed. He didn't budge. Then, with a forced chuckle, he muttered, "Plenty of folks claim that to dodge trouble." The air between them chilled. She sensed it, the wind slowing, the commuters nearby casting sidelong glances, edging back. No one stepped up. They never did. Sarah stayed still, but her mind raced, calculating what to say, where her hands were, what the cameras might catch. She paused, then said, "I'm not dodging anything. Just getting to work, like anyone else." He didn't like that. Her steady defiance, delivered without raising her voice, grated against his need to dominate. He rocked on his heels, a smirk curling his lips, eyes cold. "Got ID?" She reached slowly into her coat, movements deliberate, visible, and handed it over. He studied it too long, flipping it like it might spill secrets. Finally, he grunted, "Name doesn't match what I expected." She raised a brow. "What were you expecting?" He ignored her, tossing the ID back without a glance. The air turned sharp, electric, like the calm before a storm when your skin prickles. She saw it in his tightening jaw, the absent tap of his baton against his thigh. His stare lingered, daring her to crack. "You've been here before," he said, voice dropping, tone shifting from civil to menacing. She inhaled. "Yes, many times. Never an issue until now. Silence fell, not calm but fragile, ready to shatter. Sarah's heart stayed even, but her breath deepened, an old instinct flaring. She wasn't scared, but she was wired, hyper-aware of how quickly nothing could spiral. One wrong word, one stray look, one mistimed breath. She glanced past him, catching flickers in her periphery. An older woman clutching her purse tighter, a teen fake scrolling his phone, recording. No one spoke. The platform had become a stage, and she was its unwilling star. Yet she wasn't performing. She was protecting, guarding not just her dignity but her right to exist without justifying it. "Something wrong, officer?" she asked, voice smooth but edged, like velvet over a blade. He stepped back slightly, her question hitting like a jab, his thin veil of civility cracking. "Not yet," he growled, just keeping things in order. He turned, letting the silence hang, then muttered, "Stay put. I'm watching." He strode off, his steps heavy with the swagger of unchecked power. Sarah sat motionless, blinking once, hands calm in her lap, though her pulse screamed this wasn't done. It never was. The train's faint hum grew closer, but the air stayed heavy, as if the sky itself was watching. She took another sip of now cold coffee, whispering to herself, "Bring it, whatever it is." Then she stood, brushed off her coat, and stepped forward, not fleeing, but facing whatever loomed next. Sarah held her ground, standing resolute a few feet from the bench, her suitcase at her side, eyes locked on where the tracks vanished into the trees. She didn't track the officer's retreat. Instead, she stood firm, hands clasped before her coat, refusing to let the encounter shake her core. But she felt it. The air shifted, the people around her subtly repositioning, as if drawn by some invisible tilt, wary of being too close to the storm's center. A woman in a red hoodie leaned against a column, arms crossed, phone raised like she was texting, though her camera lens angled toward Sarah. Two teens by the vending machines, one white, one Latino, whispered, stealing glances. A man in a gray jacket peered over his newspaper, his casual mask slipping. No one spoke. No one asked if she was okay. The air hummed with unspoken questions, the kind born of curiosity, not care. Sarah shifted her stance, lifting her suitcase again, not to flee, but to anchor herself, to remind herself who she was, where she was headed, what she stood for. She set it down gently, the act almost sacred. Her breath came slow, deliberate, the kind you take when you're watched, but refuse to shrink. She'd grown used to being a question mark where others got the benefit of the doubt. But this morning felt different, not louder, but sharper, more brittle. The silence around her took shape, like glass poised to shatter with the wrong move, the wrong tone. Across the platform, the older man from earlier whispered with his wife, his brow furrowed with concern. She could read his gestures. Should we do something? But he dropped his hands, looked away. His wife shook her head softly, likely murmuring, "Let the cops handle it." They retreated further, huddling near the restroom wall. A ticket kiosk beeped as someone finished a purchase, and the train line overhead screeched briefly, steel on steel. But the unspoken tension didn't budge. It hung thick, unseen, like fog you could feel. Sarah kept her eyes forward, not out of defiance or fear, but because she knew a single glance could be twisted. A flicker of frustration spun into a threat. She'd seen it before. Colleagues, strangers, her own father outside a grocery store. You think it won't happen until it does, and then you're the one who has to stay calm while others panic. "Is she bothering anyone?" a voice asked, low but clear. Not Reynolds. It was a man in a brown vest and cargo jeans, mid-50s, near the snack machine. His tone wasn't angry, more like he was stoking a fire while playing peacemaker. A woman nearby murmured, "She's just standing there." Yet no one spoke to her directly, talking around her like kids afraid to touch fragile glass. Sarah inhaled deeply, exhaled through her nose, eyes unblinking. She didn't answer the man, didn't justify her presence, didn't apologize for existing. She'd learned long ago that answering the wrong question fed the wrong power. Instead, she pulled her train ticket from her coat, holding it loosely, not as proof, but as a reminder she belonged. Then, with deliberate calm, she sat back on the bench, crossing one leg over the other, hands resting in her lap as the wind tugged her coat's edge. A pigeon flapped clumsily by the trash can, and a loudspeaker crackled, announcing the train's arrival in 3 minutes with a flat, robotic voice that echoed across the platform. But no one eased up. They waited, not for the train, but for something else. Something they couldn't name but hoped to see. Sarah felt it in their stares, their craving for a scene, their silent wish she'd give them something to film. But she wouldn't. She never had. The real show was theirs, the way they turned presence into suspicion, stillness into threat, dignity into rebellion. The train's whistle sang in the distance. She leaned back slightly, letting the sound flood her chest. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. She knew the platform's truth, heavier than words. Then she heard the boots again, closer, heavier, angrier, as if the officer's mood had soured, or maybe it was never calm. The train wasn't here yet, but the platform's vibe had turned toxic, each of his steps thickening the air around her. Sarah didn't move at first, hands still folded, spine rigid, but her back muscles tensed like a drawn bowstring, ready to snap. She didn't need to look to know it was him. His footsteps had burned into her nerves, a warning etched since childhood. Officer Reynolds stopped just behind her right shoulder, close enough to cross a line without breaking a law. His shadow slashed across her lap like a blade, his breath hot and sour against her neck. He didn't speak, just loomed, waiting for her to crack, to acknowledge him, to give him an excuse. She didn't. She stared ahead, breathing evenly, heart steady but on high alert. Then, with a jolt that tightened her jaw, he stepped in front of her, leaning in, hands on hips. "Think you're above everyone here?" He spat, voice sharp and venomous. "Think that badge makes you untouchable?" His words crackled like static, pointless but relentless. Sarah met his eyes, calm, fearless. "I think I have the same right to be here as anyone," she said, voice low, unyielding. That sparked something in him, something ugly, itching for release. He stepped closer, knees nearly brushing hers, bending until his face hovered level with hers. "Let me make this clear," he hissed. "I don't care what office you claim. Out here, I'm the law." His voice broke on law, not from fear, but from raw entitlement. Then, for reasons only he knew, he roared, a full-throated bellow meant to crush her spirit before her body. "Answer me when I'm talking to you," he thundered, words hitting like spit-flecked bullets, his face inches from hers. Veins bulged in his neck like twisted cords, and for a split second, the world drowned in his noise. Her ears rang, her eyes stung, but her face didn't budge. She sat, unshaken, unbreakable, even as his voice flooded the air with a violence teetering on the edge of physical. The platform froze, gasps, a child's whimper, but no one stepped in. In that fleeting moment, between instinct and breath, between dignity and danger, something ancient stirred in Sarah. Not rage, not panic, but a deep, buried force. He'd crossed a line, not with his words or his roar, but with the smug certainty in his eyes that she'd crumble, that she'd fold like so many others to avoid a headline. She rose slowly, deliberately, her movements devoid of aggression, giving him nothing to pin on her. But the silence between them crackled with power neither could tame. He stepped back, startled she hadn't bowed. For a moment she saw him, not as a man, not as a cop, but as something lesser than he believed. Her pulse pounded in her hands, but her voice stayed cool. "You're out of line," she said, plain and cutting. "And you know it?" He reached for her shoulder, maybe to intimidate, maybe to detain, maybe worse. But he barely grazed her coat, his move clumsy with frustration. In that instant, every slight, every stare, every unjust stop, every swallowed silence from courtrooms, classrooms, and streets fused into one razor-sharp choice. Her fist flew before her mind could catch up, a clean right cross, honed by marine boxing, landing with surgical precision. It struck his jaw with a crisp, brutal crack, time bending around the sound. His head whipped aside, his body collapsing under gravity's judgment, hitting the concrete in a flailing heap. Gasps rippled through the platform. A phone clattered to the ground. Someone screamed. Sarah stood, breathing hard, not from fear, but from release, from shattering the script she'd been forced to follow. She hadn't planned it, hadn't wanted it, but when it came, it was truth. Fierce, sudden, undeniable. The echo of his fall rang in her ears as she saw the train's headlights pierce the dawn mist like a silent verdict. She didn't run. She didn't explain. She stood, gazing down at the man who'd tried to break her, now sprawled silent on the pavement. For a moment, time slowed, not like in movies, but in the quiet, disorienting way life does when adrenaline surges, and you've crossed an irreversible line. Sarah didn't look for witnesses or consequences. She stood, breath rising and falling, the platform's noise fading under a rush of memory crashing like a tide. Her hand, still curled from the strike, dropped to her side, carrying a familiar weight she hadn't felt since her last day in uniform. She hadn't meant to hit him, hadn't wanted to. But in that moment, his screams, the crowd, his hand reaching as if he owned her, something primal rose from her core, speaking in the only language he seemed to grasp. As her pulse thundered, a buried voice echoed from a desert she'd never wanted to revisit. "Hold the line," her drill sergeant had roared, face inches from hers in a Kandahar sandstorm. "Don't flinch. Don't wait to be struck. If they come at you, hit back harder." Those words were for combat then, for survival in a world where silence could kill. Now, on this cracked platform, with a man at her feet and a crowd watching like bystanders to her life, they carried a new weight. She'd joined the Marines at 19, defying high school counselors who said law school was a pipe dream and fast food was her reality. Her mother had cried the night she left, not from fear, but from fierce pride laced with worry. "Don't let them break you," she'd whispered, cupping Sarah's face. "Don't let anyone steal your name." And Sarah never had. Not through boot camp, not in the chaos of a Ramadi ambush, not when her unit mocked her for being too quiet, too careful, too black, too female, too everything that didn't fit their mold. Yet, for all that strength, all that training, silence had often been her only shield back home. In courtrooms where her steps were watched like threats, in police briefings where high-ranking men with no empathy reduced suspects to numbers, in defending clients like her, ground down by a system that exhausted them before it listened. There had been countless moments she could have roared back, moments her fists itched to clench, but she'd held back, knowing the cost. She knew how fast a black woman could be labeled aggressive in a courtroom, uncooperative in a meeting, how quickly she raised her voice could erase a decade of medals, degrees, and service. But today was different. Not planned, not calculated, but raw instinct, a refusal to make room for humiliation. She didn't owe the world her restraint anymore. A child's cry broke the air, fear or confusion. She couldn't tell. No one approached. The crowd shifted but didn't scatter, watching, whispering, recording. In their motion, Sarah felt a sharp solitude, not loneliness, but the clarity of doing what had to be done, even if the world wouldn't get it. A voice, gentle, cut through. "Ma'am, you okay?" She turned slightly. A young woman in scrubs, pale, eyes uncertain. Sarah nodded, slow and sure. "I'm fine." Her voice was rough, not from yelling, but from carrying too much too long. The woman stepped back, offering nothing more, blending into the staring crowd. For the first time in years, Sarah thought of her old unit. Silent nights after firefights, boots caked in mud, faces blank, sharing a bottle no one claimed. They didn't talk about what they'd done, but they understood. Silence then wasn't shame. It was reverence, the cost of clarity. That's what this felt like. Not rage, not regret, but a piercing clarity. A moment when a line was crossed, and she'd held it as trained, as her mother prayed, as her body remembered, even when her mind doubted she could. She didn't feel the punch's impact, not like Quantico drills or dusk workouts in her garage when the world's noise drowned her thoughts. The release wasn't in her knuckles or shoulder, but deep in her gut, where years of swallowed pain had hardened into something nameless. It wasn't anger, it was clarity, terrifying in its calm, watching him fall like a tree cut at its root, inevitable as physics. Time stalled for a heartbeat, not because the world stopped, but because her mind did. The chaos, shouts, gasps, a walkie-talkie's static, faded like a storm's volume being dialed down. Her eyes stayed on Reynolds as he crumpled, knees buckling, arms flailing, more pitiful than threatening. He hit the ground with a dull thud, and the platform shifted. It wasn't a stage anymore, it was aftermath. Sarah's breath held steady, though her chest burned with adrenaline's aftershock. Her hand throbbed faintly, proof the punch landed clean. But her focus wasn't pain. It was what came next, not from the crowd or Reynolds, but from her own inner voice, always asking after an irreversible act. Was it worth it? Before she could answer, footsteps rushed in. "Call someone! He's down!" one voice shouted. "Did she hit him?" Another gasped. No one approached. No one helped. They clustered, keeping distance, as if nearness made them guilty. Phones recorded, hands shook, eyes flicked between the fallen officer and the woman standing tall, breathing through a choice. She looked at him again, not with regret or rage, but with the cold distance of someone done being scrutinized. His mouth gaped, one eye squinted tighter, as if not just fallen but laid bare. His badge hung crooked, his radio crackled, then fell silent. Her body screamed to move, to brace for retaliation, but none came. No swarm of backup, just the weight of eyes and the truth of something unerasable. She didn't shout or explain. She turned her head, catching the train's glint slicing through the haze. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. The body letting go when the storm passes, if only for a moment. She curled her fingers, pressed her hands to her sides, and inhaled. The burnt coffee, Diesel's bite, the crisp dew, grounding her with fierce clarity. "Is he breathing?" A man's voice cut through, panicked. "I think so. He's groaning," another replied. Murmurs buzzed like insects before a storm, but no one spoke to her. No one met her gaze. They couldn't decide if she was villain, victim, or spark. Maybe all, maybe none. She stepped back, not retreating, but recentering, and saw her suitcase, still upright, patient, untouched by the chaos. It held her briefs, her court files, her spare flats, and her father's bronze star, tucked in a hidden pouch. In that moment, She felt its weight. Not just the bag, but the story, the burden of carrying so much, always asked to do it quietly. "I didn't want this," she whispered, not to anyone, but to the universe, to her mother's voice urging composure, survival, never giving them what they wanted. Yet today, she'd given them something they weren't ready for, a woman who didn't cower, who struck back. And it didn't feel like loss. It felt like a spark. The train screeched to a stop, doors hissing open, cool air sweeping the platform. The conductor stepped out, blinking at the officer sprawled on the concrete. He said nothing, just waited. Sarah glanced at the train, then back at the man on the ground. No triumph, no brokenness, just presence, rooted like a flag in unyielding soil. She wasn't dwelling on consequences, not yet. She was savoring what it meant to be seen, real in a place that often erased her. The silence returned, thick but alive, brimming with meaning, with breath. And in it, her answer crystallized. Yes, it was worth it. Sirens roared in, late but piercing, as if they'd been waiting since he hit the ground. Sarah didn't move, standing firm by her suitcase, her coat swaying in the breeze from the patrol cars. Blue and red lights danced across the platform's walls, painting a scene of stark contrasts. Warm light, cold stares, public frenzy, private calm. 3 officers spilled out, all white, moving fast but restrained, trained to read chaos through lenses of fear and control. One knelt by Reynolds, checking his pulse, noting his badge, the blood pooling under his cheek. Another stepped between Sarah and the crowd, not to shield, but to contain, his hand near his holster, scanning her like a threat assessment. The third approached her, face tight, eyes unreadable. "Ma'am, don't move," he said, reflex more than command. She didn't answer. She hadn't moved in minutes, with no intent to flee. Her hands stayed at her sides, palms open, posture calm. She knew the script, even if it wasn't written for her. He edged closer, cautious now. "I need you to sit," he said softer. She met his gaze, not defiant, but clear. "I'm not resisting," she said, voice steady. "Do what you need." He blinked, thrown by her calm, and pointed to a concrete bench. She walked to it, the weight of eyes pressing like cold steel on her spine. Sitting, her knees quivered, not from guilt or fear, but from the release of holding still too long in a shouting world. The officer stayed quiet, guarding her, occasionally touching his earpiece, glancing with a mix of suspicion and confusion, unable to pin her as victim, aggressor, or enigma. She knew that look. It had trailed her through classrooms, courtrooms, stores, where her smile was too much or not enough. It was always about others deciding her story. Across the platform, EMTs hoisted Reynolds onto a stretcher. He groaned, dazed, his mouth bloody, disbelief etched in his eyes. He tried to lift his head to see her, but they held him down, urging calm. A young black medic locked eyes with Sarah for a split second. No smile, no nod, but a shared understanding. Another patrol car rolled up, slower, lights spinning. A tall, lean woman stepped out, uniform crisp, face unreadable under short curls. Her tag read, Sergeant L. Carter. Sarah didn't know her, but her stride screamed experience. She didn't go to Reynolds. She came to Sarah. "Name?" Carter asked, calm, direct. "Sarah Thompson." "Occupation?" "Public defender, former Marine." Carter didn't write, just studied her, then nodded. "We'll talk inside." The ride to the station was silent. No cuffs, no shouts, just the crackle of the dispatch radio cutting through the steel quiet. The driver didn't speak or glance back. Sarah sat, eyes forward, hands folded, her reflection faint in the window as shops, houses, and empty streets blurred past. The morning hadn't fully woken, yet the day held its breath. She considered calling someone, her cousin, her boss, a trusted lawyer, but imagined the tangle of incident, altercation, non-compliance with prior service, female suspect, recorded footage. She chose to wait, not from fear, but from a resolve deeper than dread. At the station, they led her through the back, dodging the public entrance and its noise. Coffee and floor wax stung the air, printers hummed, tired footsteps echoed. A young officer opened an interview room, eyes nervous, gesturing her in. She nodded, stepped inside, sat and waited. The door's soft click left her truly alone, not in despair, but in the heavy stillness after a storm, when everything's shifted and nothing looks the same. The room was small, windowless, cold, its pale green walls more void than color. A scratched metal table sat under a flickering light that seemed to stall time itself. Sarah sat, coat folded over her lap, hands resting lightly, as if still on the platform, bracing for what came next. The silence wasn't empty. It buzzed with distant printers, muffled voices, the electric hum of lights. But here, it felt sealed, built to smother truth. She didn't slouch or fidget, sitting upright, alert, making the steel chair seem unsteady beneath her. After long minutes, the door hissed open, and 2 detectives entered. One, young and pale, gripped a notepad like a shield. The other, older, broad, face worn, believed in patterns over people. No introductions, no smiles, just chairs scraping as they sat, like a tense deal no one named. The older one cleared his throat, leaning in. "Miss Thompson, we're here to sort out this morning. Nothing formal yet. Clear?" His voice was smooth, practiced, masking intent. The younger one clicked his pen, scribbling before she spoke. Sarah eyed them, then the table. "I'd like legal counsel before questions," she said. Calm, factual. The older detective nodded slowly, expecting it, but hoping otherwise. "You're right," he said. "But context now helps. Cooperation smooths things." She didn't flinch. Cooperation wasn't the issue out there. Her words hit hard. The younger one shifted, coughed, glanced at his partner. The older leaned back, arms crossed. "We saw the body cam," he said. "Parts of it. You were calm, until you weren't." Sarah tilted her head. "Until I defended myself. That's what we need to get," he said, feigning softness. But the edge cut through. "What made you feel threatened? What justified force?" She met his gaze. He screamed in my face like I wasn't human. Reached for me, crossed a line. Her voice held. No rise, no waver. But its restraint, its weariness, its precision, stilled the flickering light. The younger detective scribbled, then looked up. "Marines, right?" "Yes, trained in hand-to-hand. And you chose to hit an officer. I chose not to be touched by a man who thought he could humiliate me." The room froze. The pen stopped. The older detective exhaled, pensive. "The footage shows aggression, no question. But you know how this looks." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "I do. I've defended people in this chair. No cameras, no badge, no clean record. I know what it looks like when someone black fights back. It's a threat, even when it's not." Silence fell. Not hostile, but heavy with reckoning. They had no script for her. A defendant who spoke like a lawyer, carried herself like a survivor. The older detective stood, nodding to himself. "We'll stop here. Legal aid's coming. You'll be briefed." The door hissed shut, but the air had shifted, the story taking shape beyond the glass. Sarah sat, letting silence wrap her, not as punishment, but as armor. Her hands, folded, steady, held something new beneath the exhaustion. Not fear, not relief, but a timeless sense that this story was no longer just hers. It never had been. The video exploded 2 days later, leaked to a small justice blog that rarely saw traffic. It should have faded, lost in the digital noise, but it ignited, maybe for its raw, unedited truth, no cuts, no voiceover, just reality. Maybe for the officer's biting tone, impossible to excuse. Or maybe for Sarah, unyielding, refusing to break until she had to. Barely 4 minutes, it spread like wildfire, from activist circles to national headlines screaming, "Marine fights back," and "Lawyer drops cop in viral clash." Comments flooded in, praise clashing with venom, the kind that erupts when a black woman claims her space. Sarah sat in her dark apartment that night, laptop glow casting shadows. She didn't rewatch the clip. Its frames were burned into her like a second skin. Too fresh, too vivid. Outside, cars hummed. A dog barked. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Friends' texts, reporters' calls, strangers' voicemails offering support or demanding answers. She stayed silent, not ready for the chaos, her chest caught between fire and haze. A letter slid under her door from the DA's office. Not a warrant, not a gag, just a notice. Officer-involved incident under review. Statements recorded. Her fingers barely shook as she folded it away, sealing a truth too heavy to hold. By morning, news outlets shifted from assault to forced discrepancies and body cam questions. Civil rights lawyers hit TV panels, citing cases where footage exposed or exonerated. Some called it a pivot point. Others said it'd fade, lost to distraction. But the real shift was in the questions forming. Why was she stopped? Why did no one step in? How long had that officer gone unchecked? In courtrooms, her name echoed. Judges, once indifferent, now watched her closely. Colleagues, once distant, whispered, "That was you, right?" With awe and unease, she nodded, letting their discomfort settle where it belonged. Her mother called, voice taut with pride and worry. "I saw it," she said. "What you did." A pause stretched across years of sacrifice. "You okay, baby?" "Tired," Sarah said. Raw, but okay. Her mother's laugh was low, knowing. "You've been fighting since you were born." That night, spray paint appeared outside the courthouse. Not protest, but truth. Being black isn't a threat. Silence is. Washed away by dawn, its message lingered in halls, interviews, reopened meetings. Sarah didn't cheer or pose for cameras. She worked, reviewed cases, met clients who now saw hope in her defiance, as if she'd bent the sky for them. She knew justice didn't ride on cheers. It demanded pressure, persistence, showing up when the noise died. That was her choice, not a symbol, but the person she'd vowed to be. Present, ready, unshaken, fighting. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polished wood, a scent clinging to memory where silence thrived. Sarah strode through its brass arch that morning, head high, once daunting, now just necessary. Reporters waited past the metal detectors, mics like weapons, eyes starving for a soundbite. She gave none. Her words were for the courtroom ahead. The hall buzzed, clerks with carts, lawyers adjusting ties, heels clicking like a countdown to something unstoppable. Courtroom 3 waited behind a heavy oak door, its brass handle worn by countless hands, guilty and innocent, all carrying stories. A deputy nodded as she approached, his gesture softer than neutral. Inside, the air was heavy, cold with expectation. The courtroom wasn't packed, but wasn't empty. Early spectators, unfamiliar faces. Waiting. Her attorney, Evelyn Carter, a black woman in her 60s, sat to the left. Known for slicing through lies with precision, she adjusted her glasses as Sarah joined her. Across the aisle, the DA's rep, a young man in a navy suit, fidgeted with papers, avoiding her gaze, glancing at the door for rescue that didn't come. The judge entered, face unreadable in his 70s, white, known for scorning time-wasters, but fair when pressed. Sarah had faced him before. He'd never truly seen her until now. "State of proceedings," he said, voice firm. The DA's statement was vague, formal. Assault incident, ongoing investigation, body cam review. It faltered under the weight of public footage. Evelyn rose, voice quiet but lethal. "Video shows my client didn't start this. She faced escalating aggression, cornered, shouted at, reached for without cause. This isn't opinion, it's fact." She paused. "If Officer Reynolds had worn his badge with dignity, we wouldn't be here." Murmurs stirred the gallery, silenced by the judge's gavel. He studied Sarah, weighing her against decades of bias. She held his gaze. "Miss Thompson," he said, "speak before my ruling." She stood, unhurried. "I've served my country, my community, defended those with no voice in rooms like this. I never expected this chair. I never thought silence would keep me safe. No tears, no pleas, just truth, letting silence carry the rest." The judge clasped his hands, exhaled, and faced the DA. "Given the evidence, no cause for charges now." His gavel tapped. "Case deferred, pending disciplinary review." Not an acquittal, not an apology, but a crack in a long-closed door. As the room cleared, Sarah lingered, watching the crowd, some nodding, some staring with questions. Evelyn touched her arm. "You held your ground." Few could. Sarah nodded, chest tight. "I didn't want this," she said softly, "but I'm not leaving silent." The gavel fell, but something deeper in her rose. Change came quietly in a certified letter 2 weeks later. Official, like those she'd handled for clients. It bore her name, a single page from Internal Affairs. Officer Mark Reynolds suspended indefinitely. Conduct unbecoming. Prior complaints reopened. She held it, not rereading, not needing to. No joy, no closure, just vindication. A long-held breath released. She tucked it away, telling no one. The world already knew. More followed. Records once locked now arrived freely. Personnel files, complaints, buried testimonies. A woman stopped for a taillight, interrogated for 20 minutes. Another cuffed before her kids for asking why. Familiar, consistent stories. When the Civilian Oversight Committee called, asking her to speak, not as victim or witness, but as a professional who knew both sides of the badge, she hesitated, wary of more scrutiny. But the faces of her clients, the hum of fear in their voices, pushed her to say yes. In a city hall room lined with flags and dusty portraits, she spoke, not a speech, but facts, patterns, accountability, the cost of patience with a system that never reciprocated. A reporter asked, "Is this about one bad cop?" She held his gaze. Number M. It's about good ones staying silent. That line hit the front page, bold above her calm, steady image. A week later, a smaller headline. Thompson appointed to Civilian Police Oversight Board. She hadn't sought it, but a council member, moved by the footage, called. "We need someone who knows justice and restraint. You've lived both." She took the role, not for glory, but for the chance to ask questions in rooms that rarely allowed them. Her first meeting was quiet, formal, but her voice carried weight. People listened, noted her concerns. Her presence, once questioned, was now part of the record. That night, on her porch with tea, the day's weight settled softly. The city wasn't fixed, the system wasn't just, but a crack had formed, letting light seep through. A neighbor paused at her gate, shy but smiling. "Miss Thompson, you did something good." She nodded. We all deserve better. Before bed, she tucked the suspension letter into an unlabeled folder. Not a trophy, but a reminder that silence hadn't saved her, and speaking, clear, fearless, had brought her back to herself. 2 months later, Sarah returned to the platform, the light softer, mist curling along the tracks like a tender embrace. The same chipped bench stood unchanged. She didn't sit, lingering at the platform's edge, the cool air brushing her cheek, the rails stretching toward a horizon that felt new. No reporters, no cameras, just commuters with coffee and earbuds, nodding out of habit, not curiosity. An older man offered a warm smile. She returned it, surprised at its ease. The tension that once pulsed like a second heartbeat had dulled, not gone, but no longer her center. She exhaled, feeling the shift settle. The train arrived, but she didn't board. She was here to reclaim the space, to feel its difference, not fear, not rage, but presence, hard-won and undeniable. A boy tugged his mother's sleeve, pointing at the train. The woman glanced at Sarah, her look free of suspicion, just human. Sarah sat on the bench, coat smoothed, hands relaxed, shoulders unbraced. The chill in the wood felt welcoming now. A voice spoke, quiet, unfamiliar. Saw you on the news. Didn't think you'd ride with us. A young man, hoodie up, curious, not hostile. I don't ride above anyone, she said, half smiling. That's the point. He nodded, looked at his shoes. Glad you hit him. She didn't reply, not because she disagreed, but because the punch wasn't the heart of it. It was about a line drawn. The real work was what followed. As the train pulled away, the platform stilled, the wind weaving through columns, carrying earth and steel. Sarah closed her eyes, listening. Footsteps, traffic, the vending machine's hum, all ordinary, undisturbed. Her existence here needed no defense. She thought of her father, always near. In full silence, he'd say, "Dignity isn't given. It's held, even when they try to take it." She whispered it now, barely audible, but enough, rooted in her bones. As light climbed the tracks, warming the platform, she grasped something beyond victory, steadier than a claim. Justice wasn't a moment. It was a stance, a discipline, a refusal to let the world define you. She stood, lifting her briefcase with ease, gazing down the rails. More hearings, clients, systems to challenge lay ahead. She wasn't alone. She never had been. A woman passing nodded, not in awe, but in solidarity, sharing an unseen burden. Sarah nodded back, steps steady, breath even. The day opening with quiet clarity. The world would bend again, under bias, under noise. But she'd bend with it, never break. What she'd reclaimed couldn't be taken. What she'd learned couldn't be undone. Not every truth needed shouting. Sometimes the loudest lived in stillness, in showing up, dignified, deliberate, fearless. Sarah's story wasn't just about one cop or one punch. It was about the spaces where power abuses and silence is demanded, the quiet violence Black women endure in public, in work, in streets walked 1,000 times. She didn't fight to be a hero. She fought for her dignity, her voice, her right to exist unapologized. The lesson burns bright. Dignity isn't earned. It's a birthright. When systems fail it, standing tall becomes more than courage. It's necessity. Sarah's story screams that justice isn't handed down. It's forged by those who refuse erasure. If this moves you, if it echoes your own fight, don't let it end here. Share it, speak it, carry its weight into your world, your vote. The louder we tell these truths, the harder they are to ignore. If you believe in stories that fight for justice, that lift quiet strength, like this, share it with someone you love, and subscribe for more raw, real stories that matter. Thank you for listening.